I'm delighted to be hosting this panel session because, of course, major topic about repurposing, but also we have panelists from all different areas and perspectives that they bring. We've got the architect, of course, got a really interesting angle that Tim brings with Meanwhile Space as well, and Property Guardians. We've got the investor side covered there with Tom and Charles from the surveyor side. So we're going to cover quite a few different perspectives, and I'll get them to introduce themselves. But with no further ado, I'm quite keen to get straight into it. I'm Zoe Ellis-Moore, Spaces to Places, and we focused on the flexible office sector, so primarily focused on quite a niche sector that's really seeing quite a transformation in some buildings and activation as well. So I will let each of our panelists introduce themselves, but also give an example and what they see really with this repurposing, where it comes to life and what they've been working on with repurposing. The other briefing I did give the panelists today was, I know we've all been sick of politics, really. I did say to them, it's okay if they don't directly answer the question like a politician. If they have some salient points that they want to get across, some golden nuggets, some knowledge to share with you, it's okay. So I think that's the one where they can go a bit off piece, is all right there. So the first, for Paul, to introduce yourself, an example then, please.
Yeah, hi. Morning, everyone. My name is Paul Wells. I'm a partner at Studio Marin. We're an architecture and interior design practice that lead really on hospitality-led projects across urban living models from student all the way through to hotels and service apartments. We're working a lot of conversion opportunities at the minute, primarily from office accommodation into hospitality uses, like service apartments. We're working on a lot of listed buildings that are no longer fit for purpose, but we're also doing some very large-scale 1970s and 80s offices, which we're converting into student and office as well. Student and hotel, not office, be daft.
And have you got any locations-wise?
Yeah, so we're working in the city in Camden, and we're working down in Woolwich as well. Actually, Woolwich is one we'll probably touch on extensively because we overlap with Tim on that one.
And Tim, yourself?
Good morning, everyone. My name's Tim Lowe. I'm the founder of the Lowe Group. We provide Meanwhile solutions for vacant properties, typically going through planning and redevelopment. So we started off on the housing side, so that's providing young professionals, key workers, creators with affordable housing. We've recently partnered with a number of arts charities, which is artist studios, exhibition spaces. For the property owners, while they're going through planning, mitigating on rates, security costs, we can generate some revenue. That's also a positive side. But I suppose the wider piece of this is actually the social impact our schemes and spaces can provide, so that when a client starts working with us, straight away they are effectively getting a really interesting concept coming in there and kick-starting their development, often in slightly less desirable areas. So it's been, really interesting experience. We work all across London and the UK. Our largest building houses 120 people, so we're a super affordable co-living product in that respect. As we touched on as well, we're also working on a similar project in Woolwich, where we've got 500 artists and a range of different exhibition spaces down there as well, providing super affordable rents, which across London and the UK is right at the top of many people's requirements.
So I'm really wondering, with sort of the Meanwhile Space, before it gets to sort of the bigger part of the repurposing side, that you're sort of playing that role, what happens, you built a community there of people, and they're going to get replaced in some ways, or, don't really want to use that terminology, but what happens to that community after it moves into the next phase, because you're just doing sort of the pre while it's going through planning and really providing that vital role?
I think it's a really good question, and it's often, every client when we start working with often asks us this: if suddenly one of our projects becomes really successful and starts becoming, of cultural significance to some of these communities, what then happens when notice is served and the plans for the building change? And often they can change quite a lot from what we're doing to, let's say, luxury accommodation, for example. I think what's really interesting about young people, and not necessarily just young people, but where the market is at the moment, is that people have become a lot more transient. So everybody who signs up and takes a license effectively on one of these buildings, so they've got no exclusive possession or legal protection to be there, they know that the trade-off of getting a 50% market discount or where they pay otherwise is that this is, meanwhile, this is short term. And we've had a really good track record of consistently finding new sites and moving people from one space to the next. So we look to retain 50% of the people in any one building, and then they move from that as well. And I do think that there is a change, like I say, I don't want to just label this as a young person's, but there's a mentality at the moment where space is becoming much, much more transient. So that idea of being fixed in one area, it is not what it used to be.
Oh, thank you very much on that side. And so I suppose from your perspective, Tom.
Yep. Hi, Tom Charrier from Fat Properties. We invest, we develop and we operate property in the Northwest. Our core is in student accommodation, but in the past few years we've kind of diversified also into leisure, so service departments. We're developing a boutique hotel at the moment, and I suppose we've kind of gone more into the city centre as well, and with that obviously comes retail and office, and so most of our recent projects, in fact all of them and our current ones, are all about repurposing to a degree, whether it's full buildings or partial buildings, some quite drastically, some less so. So yeah, quite a range, but it's, I mean, the reason we're all here is it's such an important, topical thing at the moment, because obviously our town centres and our high streets are struggling, so we need to address it.
Amazing, thank you. And finally, Charles there.
Hi, I'm Charles Seifert, Director at Inside the Box. We are a consultancy business specialising in building safety. I'm a general practice surveyor, so we're not technical fire engineers or structural engineers. We've got three parts to the business. We do cladding remediation. We apply to the government funds and help clients secure funds to remediate. We've got a consultancy business where we're working with a number of landlords and build-to-rent operators, getting them compliant with the Building Safety Act, and we have a tech platform that helps compliance with resident engagement. In terms of the Building Safety Act, I think it's probably useful just to explain, and particularly from a repurposing perspective, we're talking at the moment, the scope of the Act is anything with 2 or more residential units, anything over 18 metres or 7 stories. What's interesting is that the Welsh Government have said their intention is that it applies to everything residential with 2 or more residential units, no matter how tall, and the English Government are looking at bringing this down to 11 metres. So an awful lot will fall within scope. I think I've been working on and around the Act for the last 2 years, and it is unquestionably the most challenging piece of legislation I've ever encountered. It makes the 1985 Landlord and Tenant Act look like a walk in the park. And I think there is just there is huge risk around non-compliance with the Act. And I think in terms of sort of your example, the best example I can give is one of my colleagues is on secondment with a pension fund who have a big ground rent portfolio. They have 12 buildings in scope, so 12 HRBs, and they have been incredibly diligent in terms of the due diligence that they have done on those buildings, intrusive surveys. They have discovered that the construction or conversion of those buildings has posed huge life safety risks on 3 of them, to the point that they've had to decant those buildings. So I think going forward, there is a whole culture change around how you build, how you convert.
And so with that Building Safety Act, it sounds like it's taking up a lot of your time then at the moment. That's, the sort of way of thinking.
It's just growing and growing because the regulator has started calling in buildings. New build, unless you have a building occupation certificate from the regulator, you cannot occupy. And existing buildings, you need a building assessment certificate. So, and the really big challenge around this, and there are an awful lot of challenges, is this is criminal sanction if you fail.
So I think that leads us quite nicely on to challenges. So that's a major challenge at the moment that we're seeing across the board. I wonder if anybody else is really finding that at all. So the other sort of challenges we want to cover, I think if we go on Charles, really, Tom, on your side from the investor perspective, what are the big challenges for yourself with repurposing?
Planning's always one. I'm sure we could all kind of talk about planning issues. For us, a major challenge is the kind of on the kind of the other side in terms of financing. You know, the irony is we're talking about repurposing retail here, and if retail learn a little bit from other operational real estate sectors, you know, co-working, flex office space, hotels, and banks and surveyors and valuers would recognise, you know, in the asset value, the performance of the asset. Operationally, we probably wouldn't need to be talking about repurposing retail. Our experience is not, you know, not kind of major retail, you know, malls or department stores or anything like that, but, you know, we're working on high street buildings. We want to rejuvenate, revitalise the high street. And we want more than vape shops and mini marts, right? But, you know, getting interesting retailers in, you know, that are selling things that people really want, you know, good independents, or even not just independents, but other retailers as well. It's hard for them at the moment. You know, business rates, there's a whole raft of challenges. We can't give them any more flexibility because the banks don't, you know, they just want long leases. Long leases or nothing. You know, we've been speaking to various retailers about, look, let's, you know, do a similar thing that other models do. Let's have a more flexible lease. Let's have a profit share. Let's do these things. And it all looks really good until you get, you know, you talk to the valuer in the bank and they just say, not interested. So from our point of view, well, we just simply can't have an asset that's dropped a significant amount of value to get that in. So, you know, I think, you know, some parts of the real estate world, you know, some sectors are doing really well in coming up with creative ways to look at asset value and to push, you know, take co-working and flex office, for example. You know, that's moved on a lot in recent years and the high street has not. So I think, you know, that's the major challenge for us and for a lot of, you know, investors and developers, you know, outside of major, you know, outside of the city and stuff like that. So.
Totally back that up as well. Even for the flexible office sector, still valuations just holds up things as well. Still being so archaic in sort of the investment side.
It's just you know, lots of people kind of, you know, in the chain are wanting to push things forward, and it only takes one link that's stuck in, you know, 10 years ago thinking to say this doesn't work for us, and the whole thing kind of falls down a little bit. So, you know, hopefully we can get some more, you know, forward-thinking independent banks to start taking a more innovative approach, and then everyone will, you know, catch on, and we can see our town centres and our city centres revitalised.
Amazing. I want to do a plug for questions as well. If anybody's got any burning questions, do sort of put up your hands as well. There'll be opportunity at the end, but know that with sustainability, we had lots of questions there, so I want to make sure that if you do have burning questions, just put your hand up early and sort of let us know as well at any point. So on that side. But really quite keen to sort of think about these obstacles and challenges. How are we finding with councils? How's everybody sort of with sort of local governments and the situation there? Are they easy to work with, hard to work with?
It depends where you are, I think is the answer to that. We've just actually won planning permission for the redevelopment of Great Tower Street in the city, and the city were hugely supportive of the redevelopment of that building, and they wanted it to come forward. And equally, working down in Woolwich, it's quite a prominent site. It's been empty for a number of years, with the exception of the charity foundation that's in there. And actually, they want it to happen. They want to see a building go in there with a use class, which is going to benefit the local economy and the community. So we're putting in a large student scheme and a hotel in that site. And I think that somewhere like Woolwich, you know, they're welcoming it with open arms. Camden has been a little bit more of a challenge. I think they still think that there is a future for office. But where we're working there, we're working on a heritage building there, and really it doesn't have a future as an office building. So when you've got a redundant or struggling building, for the use class that it's been used for a number of years, I think they are supportive, and they're starting to wake up that, you know, working from home is here to stay. Office is not an asset class that's going to come back to the same level that it was before, and when you're competing with Category A offices in the city, these older buildings, they have to have a viable future. So I think it depends where you are. You said up north, it's been a bit more of a challenge.
Well, I think inconsistencies, like you said, depends where you are. What we see is just inconsistency, not just across areas, but even, you know, we've had two projects literally less than a kilometre apart. Okay, a Grade 2 listed building and a Grade 2 star listed building, and the advice or just the planning process on both of them is hugely inconsistent. Incredibly difficult to operate as an investor and a developer when you don't know if your timescales in planning are going to be 3 months or literally one of them is 2 years. It really wasn't that contentious, but it just comes down to people, you know, ultimately in the council. You can open a whole can of worms with me, sorry. but inconsistent, you know, and it needs, you need to know where you are, you need consistency, and you need a bit more predictability than we have at the moment. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, yeah. And I think the other thing we've got is we've signed up to a pre-planning agreement so that there's a set period of time they need to come back on. And that's really helping the process, particularly with the student scheme, because we've got to go through Gateway 2, we've got to go through all the Building Safety Act on that, which the hotel doesn't currently. So it's a lot more, there's a lot more clarity on where we're going with that one. But if you've got the support of the officers and the leader of the council, and then you've got that PPA in place, it does give you more of a better place to be. But we've had several projects which have taken so long through planning that they're not viable by the time they come out the other end. And that has to change. So again, planning is not this, but we're all equally frustrated, I should think.
I suppose, Tim, from your perspective, how are you finding with much more sort of going into spaces and local councils that, you know, I should imagine you might be more receptive? Or?
Very good question. I think it just depends on where and what the borough's motives are. I think on the whole, across London, everybody's pretty keen to provide more affordable housing and creative spaces, be it on a meanwhile side. So they support it, concept in general. We've had quite an interesting case in Islington where we were looking to bring back a very prominent former university by placing an arts charity in there. And look, I think every developer has different opportunities and different angles of why they want to bring this forward. This was, they had a very high seal liability on the basis of the building had been vacant for more than 3 years. So from their perspective, there was a meanwhile use which would work for the site, plus all there's a significant seal saving. Islington are supportive of meanwhile spaces, but they're not supportive of losing money out on seal. So this went into a planning battle, and Islington won the appeal on the planning side. So it really contradicts itself depending on what their general motives are, which I think from our perspective is very disappointing, because when you're providing a genuine good solution which solves lots of different purposes, if there are savings to be made for the developer, fantastic. The whole concept of, you know, an 80% saving on putting a charity in place is that charities do good in the local area, and that outweighs the rate saving they had. And exactly the same with SIL. The whole concept of getting a site in place 3 years before it was supposed to be developed is to encourage developers not to leave buildings unoccupied. But it does seem to contradict itself when there's a financial sum of money involved and they might lose out on it. So that's my experience.
And I think always we're thinking about repurposing buildings. The other one is you knock down and start again. That's always the debate, and which is more sustainable. Of course, it's always the biggest debate about sort of M&S Oxford Street, you know, and how you measure and different things, and then the incentives and tax incentives for each sort of route there. Do you come across where you're doing scenario planning, sort of working out with buildings or anything, or?
Yeah, no, so just about all our projects will be assessed on the carbon saving of whether it's worth keeping the existing building and repurposing or increasing its height, for example, or whether it's worth demolishing and putting something much more substantial on the site. In most cases, we're ending up retaining at least part of the project or the site, and actually, Woolwich is a perfect example because we probably could get a lot more on the site if we were to demolish it. But in real terms, financially and from a sustainability point of view, we don't want to do that. But what we are doing is we're removing all the cladding and we're starting afresh so that we can gain better sustainability and environmental standards on the facades. And what we're seeing with a lot, a lot of our 80s buildings is that new facades are the way forward with a retention of the shell, of the core. But with the listed buildings, obviously, it's not an opportunity. So then you've got the balance of actually it's sustainable to keep the building, but it's actually not a very sustainable building in the long run because you've got a retained heritage facade that is probably very low quality. And then we have the fight with all the councils over our listed buildings with windows seems to be the biggest challenge of whether we should have double glazing. But I think every building has that discussion, and I think that is important.
yeah, we seem to get stuck in the minutiae of things rather than kind of bigger picture. Again, we would be dealing with a lot of listed buildings recently, and it is exactly those things. You know, how do we improve the efficiency and the sustainability of this building? You know, well, and you know, do it within budget, and you know, without losing too much space, without you know, huge voids and you know, excessive, you know, internal insulation and stuff like that. So it's a challenge. It is a challenge, and yeah, I mean, typically we would only kind of knock down if we literally can't, you know, if there's no other option. We're looking at something at the moment where, you know, part of the building is like that and it will have to go. But yeah, generally speaking, from our point of view, it's kind of retained. But it depends on the context, of course.
I mean, I think my perspective and insight into this comes from a slightly different angle in as much as, Paul, as you mentioned, you know, the Act introduces two really big changes. Number one is gateways, and the regulator can hold you at gateways for up to 12 weeks. There are 3 gateways. One is planning, 2 is pre-construction, and 3 is at PC. And we're in the foothills of this at the moment. The Act really only came into force last October. There is a huge challenge for the regulator out there. There are 12,500 buildings, existing buildings in scope that the regulator is going to have to inspect and manage. But from a new build or a change perspective, you know, there is intense involvement in every new build over 18 metres, and it is a very significant amount of technical information that that the regulator needs to be provided with. You know, there are questions: how well resourced are they? How quickly are they going to be able to deal with matters? And I think one of I suppose the things that really made me sit up and think about this was the head of building control at the regulator turned around and said, design and build is no longer fit for purpose. Design, and then build. And the problem there is that the Act also introduces this really challenging piece around change control. So if you are doing anything that alters the internal layout of a building, or that is likely to affect the passive or active fire measures, that triggers an application to the regulator. So something as simple as replacing an apartment front door potentially brings about a regulator application. So I think from a governmental perspective, there are really big questions. How on earth is the regulator going to deal with the volume of what is coming their way? And what are the financial implications that come along with that?
Yeah, our clients are very concerned about that. And but in a positive way, we've been struggling with some of the conversion opportunities from planning into construction. And we're now having projects that are going into planning, and we're starting the construction detailing straight away so we can hit Gateway 2. So Michael Gove may actually have helped us, which we never saw coming. But I think that there is that difficulty. We're very concerned about how long it's really going to get taken through Gateway 2 particularly. Is it really 12 weeks? I think it will be longer in reality.
I'm just saying, is there any burning questions from the floor? Anybody want to add anything or ask any questions? One there, gentleman just at the back there.
Hi, my question is about transforming offices into hotels. Putting aside the regulatory or the financial considerations, well, what are some of the architectural and design challenges to do that?
There's a number of challenges. I think one of the biggest problems we have with a lot of the office buildings is they have very deep plans, and they don't always readily convert into hotel depths in the way that you would ideally want. I think the brands have responded to that in a positive light. We have a lot of windowless keys coming forward. A lot of brands will now accept up to 10% windowless for central locations, but they are a challenge. I think we converted Black Lion House in Aldgate East into the Hyatt Place, and in the end we had to do quite a number of structural alterations because they had a central line of columns that of course hit our corridor location, and all the columns had to be moved as part of our development of the scheme. So I think the layout is a problem, and facades and acoustic and fire properties of these buildings can be a challenge as well, particularly if they were built in the 70s. There was a lot of encapsulated insulation in the facade build-ups that really are not fit for purpose anymore. But there's always a solution. We'll always get there eventually, but some buildings are certainly more challenging than others.
Amazing. And so what we're going to do now is quickly sort of wrap up the session with some key takeaways, what you want the audience to be left with. So key points there. I think from my perspective, sometimes repurposing comes across quite reactive, but I think we're seeing much more proactiveness. So one of our clients, the boutique workspace company, they have over 36 locations in London. Most of those are grade 2 townhouses, which they were formerly residential, but very much flexible office spaces now. And so they see that as their business model and really growing and constantly expanding. So I'm wondering what other takeaways. For me, it's very much this is a positive thing on that side with repurposing. And so we'll go through any takeaways.
I think repurposing is very positive. As we say, we're talking about the ESG credentials, and I think that's, there's a given that you'll have an embodied carbon in a building. Working with heritage buildings, we're getting a lot of buildings which actually public have never had access to before, that now are becoming hotels and hospitality uses, which is drawing people in. I think there's a positive way of highlighting how beautiful some of these buildings are. And the old War Office, we didn't do it unfortunately, but it's stunning. And you think that was only for politicians before, and now we all can go and enjoy it. So I think there is definitely a positive that can be brought forward.
I suppose my take home is, if you've got a site and you're going through planning, do something meaningful with it. I think it can be very easy to strip it out, get it delisted, put some security on there, but actually start that process from day one and start thinking about who you want to engage with, what type of uses and what type of people you want in there. Because, these buildings in the short term can provide really great solutions and build genuine communities through doing so. So it's seeing the financial savings, but it's also seeing the kind of the impact you can have from day one. It's encouraging developers, which more and more are doing so, to think more interestedly about this particular type of space.
Cool. You need to come up to the northwest. I think the takeaway for me is, I suppose, all parts of the kind of industry talking to each other. Like I was saying, it's no good ideas without money behind it, agreeing on the principle, so, banks and surveyors and stuff. So we all need to communicate a bit better, collaborate a bit more, and I suppose also across industry sectors as well, because again, some people are doing it really, really well. So we need to take some of that knowledge and experience in case studies and say, hey, look, these guys can do it. Let's do the same over here. So we can all, we all want to live in nice places and shop in nice places and, have kind of businesses and services that suit our needs. So I think the more we can do that, the better.
And the final word with Charles, but I'm always thinking now about plan, and then build. But yeah.
So I think the big takeaway for me is that this legislation brings in a whole heap of new risk, and I'd break that down into 4 areas. I think there is viability risk. Compliance is going to cost you more, and the real challenge is are these gateways. If you are held at a gateway, potentially at gateway 3, which is PC, for 12 weeks, and you're burning cash. So factor that into your model. I think there's contract risk. I think in terms of placing contracts with your contractors, with your professional team, those contracts need to be fit for purpose, given the new legislation. I think there is construction risk. I think we have a real challenge around culture and the quality of work that is being delivered and evidencing that, because the regulator is going to want to see that. And finally, I think, all of this leads to risk around financing and the due diligence that potential purchasers or potential occupiers or banks are going to do, because they are going to want to see chapter and verse around Building Safety Act compliance, because the challenge of failing is you have a non-compliant building, and who is going to take that on? Who is going to remediate that?
Amazing. Thank you so much to the panelists here. It's been a joy hosting this session, and I'm going to pass back to Andrew.
Thank you so much.